Our guest speaker, Reverend Doctor, will simply, Pastor, Jared Meyer. He's a director of a mission of a Collin County Baptist Association. So we are member of a Texas Baptist or Baptist General Convention of Texas. That's a state level connection. In the locally, we are kind of ignored. I was a little bit negligent. And so many local Baptist churches are connected to county, level. And actually that's where actions are, a lot of actions and, synergies happen. Director of a mission is the kind of, mentor, consultant, catalyst, you name everything. He helps the local churches and their pastors and their leaders. And Dr. Meyer is the well-qualified, humbly speaking, I want to say overqualified, but well-qualified, director of a mission. His undergrad is a Baylor is a computer science, so second bears. And second bears. Okay, that's a few times we can put second bears. We are mixed up Longhorns and Aggies, so let's be careful. But anyway, if I neglect your school, forgive us. Okay, and then he went to Southwestern Seminary, and he did an impressively PhD in sociology in Baylor. He was a research assistant of Rodney Stark. Those of you who don't know Rodney Stark, he is I thank God for Rodney Stark, because sociologists who wrote incredible Christian history book about early church as well as American church history. He was a research assistant. He's behind all the data and the book. So he's a well-qualified. We are lucky to have Jared as our director of a mission. And so I was, not because I'm tired for the retreat, but I was looking for, and we had a great time. You should have a great time. So let's welcome Dr. Jared Gray.
Testing 1, 2, there we go. It helps if you turn off the mute button. There we go. That's a very impressive introduction. That's probably the best introduction I've had since I've been in this role for about 16 months. And the prayer before that was an amazing prayer. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. A lot is going on in our world. Even in this morning, I've been connecting. This wraps together with me talking a little bit about what I do and who I am and that sort of thing. Even this morning, one of our pastors that's replanting an Iranian Baptist church just a few miles this direction here in Plano. He had been jailed twice by the now possibly former regime. We'll see what happens. And had escaped with his family here to the United States to start a church here in Plano of Iranian community in Farsi. And his family's there, and he has, because there's no internet or anything, he hasn't been able to find out the kind of state of his family. So please be in prayer with our brothers and sisters there in Iran. So my name is Jared Meyer. Everyone pronounced my last name correctly. That rarely happens. So you all know German. Congratulations. It's one of those words, last name has 3 vowels in a row. People of English-speaking background don't know what to do with that name. So it's always mispronounced. So my name is Jared. I serve as the executive director of the Collin Baptist Association here, CBA for short. We've been around for 140 years. Since 1886, this association and network of churches has existed to plant new churches and to support churches and pastors here in Collin County. This place looked very different 140 years ago. But God knew what it was going to look like today, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. There are 126 churches that I have the honor of serving in our association, of which you now are a part, and we're so thankful to have you a part of that. Over the past year and a half that I've been in this role, this is the 86th church I've worshiped with. I'm trying to get to all 126 as quickly as possible, so it's an honor to be with you. We have somewhere around 14 to 15 languages. I say somewhere because some of our Indian congregations may have other languages they speak, but most of them will speak in English in worship so they can come together in that. It's been an honor to worship with our Iranian churches in Farsi. It's been an honor to go from the great the gamut of diversity in our churches in Collin County is just amazing. In not just language or ethnicity, but in culture. I get to worship. I worshiped in a cowboy church, and I've worshiped in a biker church, like motorcycle club church. It's just amazing the diversity that we have here in Collin County in the churches that we have. So one of the three main things that I do is, number one, support churches and serve churches. Number two, support and serve ministry leaders in our county and help them network together. The third thing is to start new churches. So Forest Community is 10 years old. We start churches like this all over the county. Last year we started 5 new churches in the county. And right now we have a cohort of church planters, 10 church planters that meet once a month that we're training to start new churches in Collin County. And out of those 10, only 4 of those would probably end up being predominantly Anglo congregations. We extremely diverse congregations that we get to start all over the county. It's a lot of fun. My background, as he said, was in sociology, religion. I got to study that for 5 years down in Waco and got to travel all over the United States and studying churches, how churches grow, how churches die, how to start churches, and all those sorts of things. It was a great honor. Before coming to this role, last thing, kind of a bio for me, I served for 15 years at a church in Prosper called Ray's Mill. I was the executive pastor there at the end. It was a church that was extremely rural, and then all of a sudden, what I call the tsunami of population growth just flooded that area. And so, as you know, tsunamis, small, old, rural churches have choices to make. It's either watch that tsunami come over you and you drown and the church starts to die, or you decide to try to grab a surfboard and take off. And so we decided, let's see if we can adapt to the culture and be able to engage the culture. And that's what I spent 15 years doing, which was an amazing experience there. So enough about me. Kind of one thing I want to talk about, the main thing I want to talk about this morning, going with my title of gospel culture, is, as you know, the world is coming to Collin County. So today, our county has 1.2 million people that live in it. The projections say that in 25 years, 2050-ish, we're going to have between 2.5 to 3.5 million people that live in Collin County. The growth here is astronomical. Last year, 4 of the 10 fastest growing cities in the entire United States, by percentage, were here in Collin County. The growth is unimaginable. Our community has been changing for some time, and there's no end in sight. And with that comes drastic culture change that we are faced with. And the thing is, we have to adapt. So I grew up in a small rural town about 30 miles north of here that's called Pilot Point. Most of you probably never been there or seen it, north of Denton. So that's where I grew up. My family actually immigrated from Germany to Texas in the 1880s and settled there. in North Texas. My family's been there for 140 years now. Some people say I was German American. I like to say I'm Bavarian Texan because my culture that I grew up in is very entrenched still in Bavarian culture. And then you move to the United States in the 1800s where it was still a frontier. And so that Texan in me is deep as well. When I left for college, he stayed earlier, I went to undergrad at Baylor. I learned really quickly that the culture that I engaged when I got to undergraduate work at Baylor was far different than the culture that I had grown up in. I just realized I have a name tag on. I'm going to take that off. I don't think I need that. So the culture was entirely different. It was so different that my classmates, my freshman year, couldn't understand what I was saying. What I call redneck, I can get away with using that word because I was one, am one in some regard. That rural redneck upbringing, my English was so thick of that rural accent that my classmates couldn't understand what I was saying. So I didn't know if I was going to tell a story. I think I'm going to go ahead and tell it. Okay, so I'm in a Spanish class my freshman year. Okay, and I'm sitting there, and the professor would say a word, and we're supposed to say what that word is in English. Well, he says, hielo. Okay? Anybody know what hielo means in Spanish? It's ice. Like you would put in a drink. Okay? Ice. So I answer ice. Okay? Now, if you'd have heard me say that over 20 years ago, it would have sounded differently. I've become culturized now. That's not a word, I just made it up. So all of a sudden, my professor like freezes and his eyes get really big. And he's like, "What did you just say?" And I said, "Ice." And then all of a sudden he goes, "Oh," and he starts busting out laughing. The entire class starts laughing at me, okay? The entire class is laughing at me because in my rural Texan accent, the word that came out of my mouth sounded more like the English word that's the King James version of a donkey, okay? It was that thick. He honestly thought I said that word as opposed to ice. Now, you don't want to go into your first semester at undergrad work and everybody in the class laughing at you because you're that culturally disconnected, okay? And listen, English was supposed to be my first language, and it was still being made fun of it, okay? I learned really quickly that I had to learn how to adapt to the culture that I found myself in. I was still, even in Texas, speaking supposedly the same language. But yet, the culture that I'd grown up in the language and how I spoke, was so vastly different that I learned I was not a part on that day that my entire class is laughing at me. I went back to my room, and I realized I have a choice to make. I've either got to adapt or I'm going to go home. I have to either adapt or I go home. It was at that moment that I chose and decided with my life that I was going to be like Paul, which we're about to talk about, and I was going to adapt. I chose to work hard at figuring out to engage people of different cultures. And what's ironic about it was I'm doing the math in my head. 10 years later, I end up going back to Baylor University because I'd been offered a fellowship to do PhD work, and I found myself teaching at the very school for 5 years where I'd been laughed at by my entire class my freshman year. Paul faced a similar situation as he was trying to share the gospel on his missionary journeys. He couldn't just do things the way he had as a Jew. He had to choose to engage the diverse cultures he was encountering on his missionary journeys and handle each culture appropriately. Which leads me to the first question I want to look at this morning. And that question is this: how do we handle cultures in a biblical way? So I want to ask you to go with me in here to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19. And I've got the ESV version up here. It's on the screen behind me. That's most of what I'm going to talk through this morning is going to be using the ESV. But I want us to join. If you've got a word with you, a Bible with you, feel free to join with me here. I want to start looking in verse 19. It says this: "For though I'm free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law." And now this is the passage that gets quoted the most. "To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some." How do we handle culture or cultures? We engage them, all of them. One of the biggest fears I cross paths with here in our community is this very thing. It's engaging culture. So there are many reasons for this, but foremost, I think that it's because of the rate of cultural change has sped up so dramatically in our lifetimes. And the older we are, the more drastic the rate of cultural change is from when we were in our developmental and childhood years. So sociologists believe that culture now is remaking itself in the American context at a rate of every 2 years. I want to sit here for a second. Sociologists believe that our culture is being remade in the American context every 2 years. Now, whether that's true or not is up for debate. But regardless, we can all agree the rate of change is at a breakneck speed as compared to 30 years ago, much less 60 years ago. This rate of change for what we consider our own culture can jar us and lead us to want to dig in, to retreat, and refuse engagement. And that isn't even taking into account for where we live here in Collin County, where we are introduced daily to people from dozens, many different cultures, and in various stages of cultural change themselves, from first generation to second generation to third generation, in all of those different cultures. Think about that for a second. Each one of those stages for each one of those cultures that people come from is in vastly different places. Even for those of us that you might think should have it the easiest, say, I grew up here, I'm about to be 48 years old. So I've lived in Texas my entire life. I grew up, like I said, 30 miles from here. But yet, even those, we live in such a place that even the people that grew up here and were raised here, the cultural change is so drastic for them that it's jarring. I mean, my family, we still had our family farm that we got in the 1890s until developers bought it several years ago. It's up kind of on the Grayson in Collin and Denton County line where the Dallas North Tollway will eventually go within a mile of it. When those people got here speaking German 140 years ago and sat on this ground, they could have never, ever imagined what we see today. And the thing is, no matter where we are culturally, we live in such a place that it can be jarring for us all. My parents still lament, oh, the traffic is so terrible. And, I hear this all the time of people just not used to it, and they just want to flee. They want to do one of two things. They either want to flee, they would just you keep running north or something, or they retreat into their enclave. But listen to me, church. God has never called us to run or retreat from anything except sin. I'm going to say it one more time. God has never called us to run or retreat from anything but sin. We have to be careful, or a sense of retreat can slip into our faith communities where we seek retreat from the cultural change around us and we fail to engage those around us. Does God call us to move at times? Yes, He does. God does. But Paul shows us in a very similar cultural situation that wherever He has called us to live, we must engage, never retreat. Now, follow-up question is of how do we handle cultures? The second question I want to look at is why? Why? Can't God use people of similar cultural background to share the gospel? Okay? Simple. I think that's my next point on the slide. So why? Why can't God just use people that are similar in culture to share the gospel? I get this all the time in my job. Like, you need to we need someone of this ethnicity to share the gospel with this ethnicity. We need somebody of this background to share the gospel with this background. And listen, that's great. We do that. I do that. I'm actively recruiting people to start churches in that way. But listen, that even though we do that, that doesn't give us a pass to just say, I'm never going to engage anyone other than the people from the same culture as me. It's a slippery slope that we can fall off into. Now you say, why? Well, we can get selfish with this, right? Well, why? I don't want to stretch myself. I want to be comfortable with the culture I'm in. Well, I want us to look at verse 23, okay? Now, I'm a huge fan of the ESV, but this is the one time that I'm going to use a translation other than the ESV. And I'm going to use the net instead, and there's a reason. Because the net translates the Greek here, in my opinion, better than the ESV does, okay? And there's because of a Greek word that I put up there. So the answer to the question is so that we can participate in the gospel. And that's seen in this passage of 1 Corinthians 9:23. It says, I do all these things because of the gospel so that I can be a participant in it. Participant. That word in Greek, the original, is sekoinenos. Okay? Sekoinenos literally means to participate. The other translations gloss over that and change the word. But in my opinion, I love the net because it still keeps it true to what Paul wrote. He said to participate in the gospel. Now, when we respect our weaker brothers and sisters, when we explore cultural differences of food and tradition with those that are not like our own, we show a humility that places the importance of the gospel in relationship with the person for the sake of the gospel above ourselves. And what that does is that allows us to be a participant in the gospel. This, friends, is Christianity. This is what Christ did. He changed. You want to talk about culture change? You know what he did? He emptied himself into the form of a servant, a human being. He's God. And he allowed himself to be constricted to the cultural limitations of humanity. Paul says he does this so he can be a participant in the gospel. Now, what's cool about Greek here is that the Greek doesn't just mean that he can be a participant in the future, like, you know, when we die, we go to heaven sort of thing. We participate in the gospel by being saved when we die. The beautiful thing about Greek here is it also means that we participate here and now in the gospel and the blessings of being part of the kingdom, as well as the future. It's a future salvific sense because of the reward in heaven, and we get to share it with the rich diversity of people that he's crossing paths with on his missionary journeys in the day as well. Now, this leads to my third and final question. What do I need to do to participate in the gospel? Go to verses 24 through 27 here. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I don't run aimlessly. I don't box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Now, there's a lot of imagery in this that you need historical context for, okay? Who's he writing to here? Church at Corinth. So the Corinthians were familiar with athletic contests. So in that day and age, there were 3 different games that were done throughout that world. So we know the Olympic Games in the name that carries over. We just experienced the Olympics, the Winter Olympics here. Well, there were a set of games called the Isthmian Games. Okay? They were organized in the city of Corinth in 582 BC. 582 BC. That means that when Paul shows up into town, these games have been going on every 4 years for 600 years. That is amazing to think about. Okay? They occurred 2 to 3 miles outside of town, and the whole realm would come to compete in these games. Now, they were second only to the Olympic Games in importance in Greece. The Greek word translated race here in this passage. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run? That word in Greek is stadion. Okay? Well, there was an actual race that was part of the Isthmian Games that was called the stadion. So when he's talking here, he's not talking about some just random race. He's talking about the race, the most important race, the race of all races. And what it was a 600-meter race that was done, and they would train 10 months leading up to that race to compete in it. That's what he's talking about, referencing back to historically here, okay? The race of all races. It was seen as the ultimate race to be able to run and win what was basically a 600-meter, okay? Just under a half mile. Now, what did the winners win? We know that if you won the stadium, you won a wreath. And in that wreath was parsley, wild celery, and pine. Think of the smells. Parsley, wild celery, and pine. It says they do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I don't run aimlessly. I don't box as one being there. Boxing was part of the games as well. But I discipline my body. I keep it under control. Think about training for 10 months for that race. He's doing the same thing, but for the gospel. To participate in the gospel and see people come to know Christ. So what do I need to do to be a participant in the gospel? Here it is. I need to exercise self-control and discipline myself so that I'm intentional about engaging anyone I can cross paths with. Now, this is important. Let's sit here for just a minute. Listen. Birds of a feather flock together. There's a social theory on that, where we gravitate toward people that are more like us, okay? So we have to get to a point where we admit that, and then we have to say to ourselves, for me to engage people that aren't like me, it takes self-discipline and intentionality. Make sense? Okay? So, it takes making a decision to do it and sticking to it. It's like sticking to a quiet time or sticking to a prayer time. Engaging people that aren't like us takes the same sort of work because we're not going to naturally gravitate toward people that aren't like us. Have the same, things in common, that sort of thing. It's much harder for me to, like those Texas Longhorn people, right? God bless them. They need Jesus. Okay? That's hard. And it takes humility as a Baylor Bear to do that. But you know what? They need Jesus. I say that in jest, but to give you an example, right? We gravitate toward others that are like us. So, my wife and I made a decision a few years ago that we were going to start a tradition in our home to help do this. Okay? So, you may think this is a really hard thing. Jared, how in the world can I be intentional about engaging people that are different from me culturally? And some of you may be in a UTD context where you're in the university every day, and hey, that's super easy, right? Because there's a lot of different cultures, and you cross paths with people there every day, some of you students. For those of us that aren't in that kind of collegiate setting anymore, it gets harder and harder and harder and harder. So my wife and I made a decision. And I just want to propose to you this afternoon. I almost said this morning because I usually preach in the morning. I propose to you this afternoon that it's as easy as cinnamon rolls. Okay? Engaging people of different cultures may be as easy as cinnamon rolls. Now, you fill in whatever sugary, great dessert fits your culture and background. For me, it's a cinnamon roll. Okay? And in particular, a homemade recipe of cinnamon roll by the lady on the Food Network named the Pioneer Woman. Okay? So we went and got the Pioneer Woman's recipe for cinnamon rolls from scratch. And we decided that every year at Thanksgiving, our family would get together, and we as a family, it's really more my wife than me, hand make cinnamon rolls. And my boys now, they are all in. One of my boys more than the other enjoys it more. And we make homemade cinnamon rolls, okay? Now, they are amazing. They are amazing. So what we do is we make pans of cinnamon rolls on Thanksgiving morning. We turn on the Macy's parade. We make cinnamon rolls. And what we do is then we take those pans of cinnamon rolls and we go to each one of our neighbors and we knock on the door, ring the bell, whatever, and we say, Happy Thanksgiving. We just want to share some cinnamon rolls with you. I have never had anyone turn them down. Okay? Never. Even one family now texts us that morning early, letting us know how many family members are there so that we can bring more cinnamon rolls, enough for everybody that's there for their... So we supply the dessert for their Thanksgiving meal now. Okay? They're that good. And you may think, what does that have to do with Jesus? Well, let me tell you what that has to do with Jesus. One of our neighbors, a lady, her sister has been living with her for the past few years, and her sister's been dying of cancer. And every year at Thanksgiving, they'd be ready for those cinnamon rolls. That act has led to a relationship with them to where now when they need things, they'll ask us and we're there to help them out. Over this past year, the sister ended up passing away of cancer. And one night, late at night, we live kind of out on the fringe. It's not going to make sense. I'll kind of give you an idea where we live. We're sort of in the country, but there's like a development of 1,500 homes being built across the county road from us. We kind of live in that sort of situation. But she still has this barn and she has horses. And it's at 10 o'clock at night and she calls us and we're like, ooh, this isn't good. And she goes, I'm about to walk out in the pasture and I realized I needed to tell someone so that if I fell, I'd have somebody that knew that I'd fallen, because she's a little bit older. She was afraid she'd fall and then just be stuck out in this pasture by herself with her horse and not be able to get up in the middle of the night. I answer, absolutely. So I walk outside, I see her up on the hill, I'm watching her go back. And then it comes around to Christmas and we start having conversations about faith, about her sister who's just passed, about her sister's faith and what that means. And so over the past couple of years, this cinnamon rolls has led to being a caretaker for a lady to make sure that she's well, to now having faith conversations of an extremely serious state. Engaging people of other cultures is as easy as cinnamon rolls. Now, what do cinnamon rolls express? Care, love, time, resources. I want to challenge this morning. You all have a cinnamon roll that you could do for someone else. You have a special family recipe. You have something that you make that you could share as an act of love for someone. And that's how you tear down cultural barriers. It takes us making an intentional decision to engage. Now listen, I got like 2 minutes and I'm done. But I want you to hear the end of this sentence. It took us making an intentional decision to engage so that our fears of cultural barriers could be broken. It took us making an intentional decision to engage so that our fears of cultural barriers could be broken. So, how do we handle culture? We engage them all. Why can't God use people that are like in similar culture? He does, but He wants to use us too so that we can participate in the gospel. And what do we need to do to participate in the gospel? Intentionally discipline ourselves to engage anyone. Let me pray for you. God, I thank you for this church. I thank you for these people. I thank you for Forrest. I thank you for Pastor. You've placed them here in such a place and at such a time as this, engaging in the cultures that they engage with in our area for a purpose and a reason. And I pray that you give them confidence. I pray that you give them courage. I pray that you give them a word to share. I pray that you give them cinnamon rolls to share with someone else, that they might lead people to know you and to break down barriers to do it. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.